The pines behind Evan McAllister's farmhouse always whispered quietly in the wind. They stood tall, old, and proud guardians of the land his grandfather had carved out with calloused hands and a stubborn sense of purpose. Evan loved that stillness. Out here, in the outer stretch of Maple Hollow, the silence was sacred. That's why, when the first rumble shook the gravel drive just past midnight, he thought it was thunder. It wasn't. He pulled on his boots and stepped out onto the porch, the night cold and sharp. The sky was clear, too clear for a storm. But headlights pierced through the tree line like a procession of unwelcome ghosts. Then came the sound, laughter, music, engines. 7 buses. Big, city-sized party buses, straining the narrow country road until they spilled into his land. "What the hell?" he muttered, grabbing a flashlight. The first bus door hissed open, spilling out people in glitter, cowboy hats, and glow sticks. Some were drunk, some already recording videos on their phones. They looked around at the wide, open field like it was their personal festival ground. Evan's land. He marched down the steps, heart-hammering, and shouted, "Hey! This is private property." No one listened. A DJ stand was being assembled near his barn. 2 more buses unloaded tables, lights, and portable speakers. The night filled with bass, deep, chest-thudding noise that rattled the windows of his home. That's when he saw her. Standing beside a black SUV, clipboard in hand, wearing her signature pastel sweater and the smug look of a queen surveying her domain, Karen Delmont, president of the Pine Ridge HOA. She spotted him and smiled thinly. "Evening, Evan. Thought we'd use this open space for our summer kickoff." The HOA approved it. Approved it, he snapped. "This isn't Pine Ridge property. This is my land." Karen gave a dismissive wave. "You're technically just outside our jurisdiction, but since your driveway connects to our neighborhood, it's considered shared access." "That's not how property law works," he said, barely containing his temper. "You've trespassed on private farmland. Get these buses out now." But she didn't even flinch. "Relax, it's one night. You've got all this empty space, thought it might finally be useful for something." The flashlight trembled slightly in Evan's grip. He wanted to yell, to drag her and every loud stranger off his soil, but there were too many. Dozens now. Maybe 100. The music grew louder, flashing lights cutting across his yard like war sirens. He backed away and called 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm but uncertain. "Sir, do you have any immediate danger? Any weapons or violence?" "No, just trespassing." "A big event? Multiple vehicles?" She sighed softly. "We'll send someone out, but it might take a while. County patrol's short tonight." Of course it was. He hung up and turned to see 2 drunk strangers climbing onto his hay trailer. Another wandered near his chicken coop. Someone knocked over a fence post. That's when Evan's patience cracked. He stormed toward Karen, who was now sipping white wine beside her SUV like she was hosting a country gala. "You're paying for this," he said. "Every inch of damage, every trespass, every—" Karen interrupted, tilting her head. "Don't threaten me, Mr. McAllister. I've already spoken to the county office about holding community events in the area. You might want to be more cooperative if you ever plan to sell this place." The implication hit him like a slap. She wasn't just hosting a party, she was trying to force him out. Evan had refused, months ago, to sell his 10 acres to the HOA expansion project. They wanted a park, a new trailhead, a buffer zone. He'd told them no, this land was his family's legacy. And now, she'd found another way to punish him. By 3 a.m., the field looked like a battlefield of plastic cups, torn tents, and tire ruts. Evan sat in his truck, recording everything with his phone, the buses, the license plates, the noise. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was documenting. Building a case. When the deputies finally arrived near dawn, they were overwhelmed. "That's a lot of people," said one officer, rubbing his neck. "We'll start dispersing." Karen was all smiles, pretending innocence. "Oh, officer, it was just a harmless neighborhood gathering. I didn't realize Mr. McAllister was so sensitive. Evan's jaw clenched. She brought 7 buses. Without permission. Look at my fence. Look at my field. The deputy took notes but spoke carefully. You can file a report for property damage. The county attorney can review it. Karen winked as they led the buses out. Good luck with that, she whispered. The county loves the HOA. We keep this place running. When the last bus disappeared over the hill, silence returned, but it wasn't peace. It was the silence of something broken. Evan looked over his land, ruts gouged into the dirt, crushed fence lines, litter everywhere. His grandfather's carved boundary post lay split in half near the ditch. He stood there until the morning light spread through the pines, the smell of spilled beer and burned grass in the air. Something hardened inside him. For the first time in years, he walked to his shed, unlocked the old filing cabinet, and pulled out the yellowed folder marked Property Line McAllister v. County 1964. If Karen wanted a war over land, she was about to get one. The sun rose pale and angry over Maple Hollow, throwing long shadows across the wreckage of the night before. Evan McAllister stood on his porch with a cup of black coffee, watching steam rise from the fields. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the restrained energy of a man pushed too far. The buses were gone, the laughter had faded, but what remained was worse, tire tracks that carved through his soil like scars. Beer cans tangled in the grass. A deep rut where his irrigation line had snapped. He didn't see farmland anymore. He saw evidence. He spent the entire morning taking photos, close-ups of crushed fencing, the splintered barn door, the cracked water line. Each click of his phone camera steadied him. Proof mattered more than rage now. By noon, he was sitting in the Maple County Courthouse, across from a clerk who looked both exhausted and skeptical. You're saying, she repeated, tapping her pen, that the Pine Ridge HOA organized this without permission? Yes, Evan said evenly. 7 buses. At least 100 people. Damage to my property. I've got videos, license plates, witness statements, my neighbor saw the whole thing. She raised an eyebrow. You'll want to start with a civil claim. Property damage and trespass. The sheriff's report will help. I'm not just filing for damages, Evan said, leaning forward. I want this stopped. Permanently. The clerk hesitated, then slid him a second set of papers. You can also request an injunction. Might take time, though. Evan nodded slowly. Time, he could handle. He'd waited years while Karen and her HOA crept closer to his boundaries, drawing new maps, sending letters, accidentally mowing a little too far past the property line. He'd always tried to stay civil. But last night, civility had died under flashing lights and party bass. By evening, the small-town gossip engine had already started. At Marty's Diner, where most of Pine Ridge's residents grabbed their morning coffee, people whispered over their pancakes. Some were appalled by Karen's stunt. Others shrugged. It wasn't the first time the HOA had flexed its power. Karen herself, of course, sat in her usual booth by the window, wearing that immaculate lavender sweater and her smug smile. Her friend Trish Keller leaned in. You think he'll really sue? Karen smirked. Evan McAllister doesn't have the money for a fight. He's a farmer, not a lawyer. By the time he files anything, I'll have the county zoning board wrapped around my finger. They'll call it a misunderstanding. But for once, she underestimated the man she thought was just another stubborn landowner. Because by that afternoon, Evan wasn't just filing paperwork, he was making allies. His first call was to Deputy Lyle Jensen, the same officer who had shown up that night. You remember the buses? Evan asked. I remember the headache, Lyle replied. Whole damn shift heard about it. I'm building a case, Evan said. I've got timestamps, plates, everything. But I need the official incident report. Lyle paused. You're serious about this? Dead serious. Something in Evan's voice made the deputy lower his tone. All right. I'll see what I can get you. Off the record. Then Evan called Laura Bennett, a local environmental attorney whose reputation for taking on corrupt boards had made her both admired and feared. When she answered, her voice was calm, direct. "Mr. McAllister, you're saying the HOA crossed onto your land for an unauthorized event?" "Yes, ma'am. I've got videos. Witnesses. And a century-old deed that proves my boundaries clear as daylight." There was a pause, then, "Send everything you've got. If what you're describing is accurate, this isn't just trespassing, it's criminal mischief and willful property destruction. We might even push for a restraining order." For the first time in weeks, Evan felt a spark of hope. Days passed, and tension spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire. Karen tried to downplay the event, calling it a community misunderstanding in her HOA newsletter. "We regret any inconvenience caused to our neighbor, Mr. McAllister," she wrote, "and will work cooperatively to resolve any minor concerns." Evan read the line aloud, his jaw tightening. Minor concerns. His field was ruined, his livestock spooked, his fence destroyed, and she called it minor. Laura Bennett wasn't amused either. She just admitted, in writing, to organizing the event. "That's good for us." Then came the surprise. 2 weeks later, Karen received a formal notice, Maple County Superior Court hearing scheduled in 30 days. Charges included trespassing, vandalism, and unauthorized commercial activity on private property. When the notice arrived, Karen's smugness finally cracked. She stormed into the HOA meeting room, slamming the letter on the table. "He's suing me personally," she snapped. "Not the HOA, me." Trish blinked. "Well, you did put your name on the event permit." Karen's face reddened. It wasn't a permit, it was a notice of intent. The county signed off, sort of. But sort of wasn't going to save her. As the hearing date drew near, Evan's nights grew long. He'd sit by his kitchen window, staring at the field beyond the fence. Sometimes he could still hear the echo of that bass, the laughter, the chaos. It wasn't just about the land anymore, it was about respect. His father had once told him, "A man's ground is his word. If you let someone trample one, they'll trample the other." He hadn't understood it then. He did now. The night before the hearing, Laura met him in person for the first time. A sharp, confident woman in her 40s, with dark eyes that missed nothing. She spread out the files across his kitchen table. "We've got video evidence, property assessment reports, police logs, and her own newsletter admitting she organized it. That's enough to push the DA to look at criminal charges after the civil case." Evan nodded. "She thinks she's untouchable." Laura's lips curved slightly. "That's what they all think before a judge sees the truth." Outside, thunder rumbled across the horizon. Inside, Evan tightened his grip on the deed that bore his grandfather's faded signature. Tomorrow, they'd walk into that courtroom not just for a patch of land, but for every person who'd ever been bullied by a petty power with too much influence. And for the first time, he felt ready. The courthouse in Maple County looked like something out of another era: red brick, white columns, the flag fluttering faintly above the steps. But that morning, it felt like the stage for a modern war. The parking lot buzzed with local reporters, HOA members, and curious neighbors whispering about the big trial. Evan McAllister parked his old pickup at the far end and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He could see Karen Delmont stepping out of her SUV across the lot, flanked by her attorney and a small crowd of HOA supporters. She looked immaculate as ever, hair pinned back, pastel blouse pressed to perfection, but there was a stiffness in her stride. Laura Bennett met Evan at the courthouse doors, briefcase in hand, confidence radiating like armor. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," he said, exhaling slowly. They stepped inside. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant. Judge Eleanor Mathers presided, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and intolerance for theatrics. The crowd settled as she entered, her gavel striking once. "This is the matter of McAllister versus Delmont," she announced. "Trespassing, property destruction, and unlawful assembly. Opening statements, Ms. Bennett?" Laura stood smoothly. "Your Honor, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a case of entitlement. The defendant, Mrs. Karen Delmont, used her position as president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association to organize a private event on land she did not own, did not lease, and had no permission to access. 7 buses of partiers trampled private farmland, destroyed fencing, and damaged irrigation infrastructure. This was not an accident. It was an act of arrogance. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Mr. McAllister seeks justice not for revenge, but to ensure that the law means the same thing for everyone, no matter how powerful they think they are. The courtroom was silent. Then Karen's lawyer, Paul Denton, rose for the defense. He was slick and practiced, with a voice that dripped condescension. Your Honor, my client deeply regrets the inconvenience caused to Mr. McAllister. This was a community event approved in spirit, if not on paper, meant to bring neighbors together. Any damage was unintentional and minimal. Frankly, this is a dispute that should have been settled with a conversation, not a lawsuit. Evan clenched his fists under the table. Laura gave him a small glance that said, "Stay calm." Judge Mathers nodded. "Proceed with evidence." Laura wasted no time. She displayed high-resolution photos of the destroyed fencing, broken gates, and tire gouges. Then she queued up video footage from Evan's security camera, headlights spilling across the field, buses pulling in, the thudding bass echoing under the stars. The footage was damning. When the court saw Karen standing by her SUV with a clipboard and wine glass, instructing where to park, even her own supporters shifted uncomfortably. Laura's voice was steady. Does the defense dispute that Mrs. Delmont was present and overseeing this event? Paul cleared his throat. We don't dispute her presence. We dispute the characterization. Then Laura produced the HOA newsletter, the one where Karen had written, "We regret any inconvenience caused to our neighbor, Mr. McAllister." Mrs. Delmont, Laura said, turning toward her, "You wrote this, correct?" Karen straightened. "Yes, but I." "So you admit to organizing the event that caused the damage?" Karen hesitated. "I coordinated the buses, yes, but the land was open." "I didn't realize." "The land was not open, Mrs. Delmont," Laura said sharply. "You were warned that it was private property, were you not?" He didn't make that clear." Evan couldn't stay silent. "I told you that night, Karen." Judge Mathers banged her gavel. "Mr. McAllister, you'll remain quiet unless addressed." He nodded, jaw tight. Laura took a breath, then said softly, "Your Honor, we submit that this was not ignorance, it was willful disregard." The defendant acted as though the rules did not apply to her. The defense called witnesses HOA members who tried to soften the story. They claimed Karen was just trying to host a community event and that Evan was always difficult. But when the deputy, Lyle Jensen, took the stand, the atmosphere shifted again. "I was the responding officer," Lyle said, his voice calm but firm. "I arrived at approximately 4:17 a.m. to find 7 buses, over 100 people, and visible damage to the property." Mr. McAllister was calm, cooperative. Mrs. Delmont was dismissive and argumentative. "I had to ask her 3 times to disperse the crowd." Laura asked, "In your professional opinion, was this an organized event?" "Yes, ma'am," Lyle said without hesitation. "It was coordinated." The defense tried to pivot, painting Evan as hostile. But when Laura cross-examined Karen again, she made a critical mistake. "Mrs. Delmont," Laura said, "did you have any written permission to use the McAllister property?" Karen's lips thinned. "No, but everyone knows that area is mostly unused." "So your assumption was that if someone wasn't using their land, you could take it?" Karen's composure faltered. "Of course not, but..." "No further questions," Laura said quietly. By afternoon, the courtroom had grown tense. The judge called a short recess, and whispers filled the air. Reporters were already drafting headlines. Evan sat on the bench, rubbing his temples. "She's twisting everything," he muttered. Laura placed a steady hand on the table. "Let her talk herself into a corner." "She already has." When the court reconvened, Judge Mathers' tone was icy. "Mrs. Delmont, this court has reviewed the evidence and testimony. You organized and permitted an event that trespassed on private land, caused measurable property damage, and disregarded repeated verbal warnings. The law is clear. Karen shifted nervously. Your Honor, I. Silence. The gavel struck once. The court finds the defendant, Karen Delmont, guilty of criminal trespass and property destruction. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $48,000, including damages and legal fees. Furthermore, due to willful misconduct and obstruction during investigation, I am imposing 30 days in county jail, suspended after 20 served, with mandatory community service. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor. Sit down, Mr. Denton, the judge snapped. I'm not finished. She turned her gaze toward Evan. Mr. McAllister, this court recognizes the burden this incident has placed upon you. You acted within your rights, with restraint and dignity. The law exists to protect property and principal alike. For the first time in months, Evan felt the weight lift off his shoulders. Karen sat frozen, pale and speechless. Her perfect posture crumbled. The same woman who once ruled Pine Ridge with her HOA bylaws and intimidation now stared at the polished courtroom floor, powerless. Outside, the sky was wide and blue again. Reporters crowded near the steps, cameras flashing, asking questions Evan had no interest in answering. He just walked down the courthouse stairs, feeling the solid earth beneath his boots. Laura caught up beside him. You did good in there, she said. I just told the truth, he replied quietly. Sometimes, she said with a faint smile, that's all it takes to win. They shook hands, and she walked off to her car. Evan turned back toward the horizon. The air smelled like pine and rain clean again. That evening, he stood by his fence line, repairing the last of the damage. The sun dipped low, bathing the land in gold. For the first time since that awful night, the silence felt whole again. His phone buzzed, a text from Deputy Lyle. Heard she started her sentence today. Bet the HOA meetings'll be quieter now. Evan chuckled softly and set the phone aside. He looked across the acres his grandfather once tended and whispered, We're still standing, old man. The wind rustled through the trees like a reply. And this time, when night fell over the pines, it brought peace not just for the land, but for the man who refused to kneel to arrogance.